I walked out of my son's house on Christmas Eve, carrying the casserole dish I had brought. And I never looked back. That night, I sat alone in my car for a few minutes before I drove home. And I made a decision that would change everything. But let me tell you how we got there. My name is Margaret, and I am 69 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse at St. Prosent Luke's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I worked night shifts, double shifts, holidays, every kind of shift there was, because I believed that hard work was how you showed love. Not just to your patients, but to your family. My husband, Robert, passed away 11 years ago from a heart attack that came without any warning on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment he was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, and the next moment he was gone. I was 58 years old. And suddenly, I was alone. But I was not the kind of woman who sat down and stayed down. I had my son, Daniel, who was 32 at the time. I had my work, my house, my garden, and my faith. I told myself that Robert would not want me to crumble. So I did not crumble. I kept going. Daniel had always been a good boy. Sensitive. Thoughtful. The kind of child who brought me dandelions from the backyard and called them flowers. When he was in high school, he struggled with math. And I hired a tutor for 2 years straight, even though money was tighter than I let on. When he got accepted to Ohio State, I cried in my car on the way home from work because I was so proud I could not see straight. I sold the pearl earrings my mother had given me, the only jewelry of real value I owned, to help cover his first year's housing costs. He did not know that. I never told him, because I did not do it, so he would owe me. I did it because he was my son and I loved him. He met his wife, Kristen, during his final year of college. She was beautiful and sharp and confident in the way that some people are when they have never had to question themselves. I tried very hard to like her. And, in the beginning, I did like her. Or, at least I liked the idea of her, that my son had found someone who made him happy. They got married in a small ceremony 6 years ago. And I contributed $15,000 toward the wedding because Daniel called me and said they were going over budget, and he did not want Kristen to be disappointed. I did not hesitate. I wrote the check that same afternoon, after they married. They bought a house in a suburb about 40 minutes from me. A nice house. A 4-bedroom colonial with a big yard. I visited often in the beginning. Every Sunday I would drive over with something I had baked or cooked. And we would have dinner together. It felt like family. It felt like what Robert and I had always hoped for. Then my first grandchild arrived. A little boy they named Cooper. I was in the waiting room for 7 hours. And when Daniel came out and put that baby in my arms, I understood completely why people say their heart grows larger. I had not known I had more room in there. But I did. I babysat Cooper every Thursday, so Kristen could go to her yoga class and run her errands. And I never once complained or asked for anything in return. Cooper called me Grandma Maggie, and he smelled like baby shampoo, and he liked to fall asleep on my chest. Those Thursday afternoons were the best hours of my week. About 2 years ago, things began to shift, in a way I could not quite name at first. Kristen started canceling my Thursday visits. Not every week, but often enough that I noticed. The reasons were always reasonable. Cooper had a cold. They had plans. The house was being painted. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that young families get busy and that I should not read too much into it. But then Daniel stopped calling as much. When I called him, he always answered. But the conversations felt shorter, more careful, like he was choosing his words. I asked him once if everything was all right and he said yes. Of course. Mom, everything is fine. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. That summer, Kristen had her second baby, a little girl they named Avery. I sent a gift, a beautiful hand-stitched quilt that I had ordered from a woman in Vermont who made them by hand, and a card with $100 tucked inside. I was not invited to the hospital. I told myself that was Kristen's preference, and I respected it. When I asked Daniel when I could come meet Avery, he said he would let me know when things settled down. Things never quite settled down enough. By October of that year, I was seeing my grandchildren once a month at most. I tried not to show how much that hurt. I brought presents. I stayed cheerful. I did not want to be the kind of mother-in-law who made family gatherings feel like a burden. Then, in November, Daniel called me with a request. He and Kristen wanted to expand the garage into a proper workshop space and then renovate the master bathroom. The contractor had given them a quote, and it was more than they had budgeted for. He asked if I could help. He did not use the word loan. He just said, "Mom, could you help us out?" The number he mentioned was $22,000. I told him I needed a few days to think about it. He said, "Of course. Take your time." I did not sleep well those few days. Not because I did not have the money I did. Between Robert's life insurance and my own savings and pension, but something felt wrong, and I could not name what it was. I had helped so many times before without hesitation. Why did this feel different? I think it was because I had not seen my grandchildren in 6 weeks. And yet here was a request for $22,000 arriving as comfortably as a Sunday phone call. I called Daniel back and I said I was happy to help with part of it. And I asked if we could talk about the Thursday visits starting again. I missed Cooper. I had not yet held Avery for more than 10 minutes total. I was not making demands. I was not threatening anything. I was simply saying, "I miss my grandchildren. Can we work something out together?" Daniel said he would talk to Kristen. He called back 2 days later and said, Kristen felt that I was trying to make the financial help conditional, and that she found that hurtful. I told Daniel I was not making conditions. I was just asking a question. He said maybe we should give it a little more time. I said okay. I said I loved him. He said he loved me too. We hung up. I did not send the $22,000. Christmas had always been the holiday that mattered most to me. Robert and I had started traditions when Daniel was small, the same ornaments every year. The same honey-glazed ham. The same record of Bing Crosby playing in the background. After Robert died, I kept every single tradition. I bought Cooper his own special ornament every year. I baked 6 different kinds of cookies and packaged them up in tins with ribbons. Christmas was not a performance for me. It was a genuine expression of everything I believed about family. Daniel called me the first week of December and told me they were hosting Christmas dinner that year. He said to come at 2 in the afternoon. He said to bring my green bean casserole because Cooper had specifically requested it. I said I would be there. I went out and bought Cooper a remote-control truck that I knew he had been asking for. And I picked out a soft stuffed rabbit for Avery, because she was just at the age where she was learning to hold things. I wrapped everything carefully, and I made my casserole from scratch on Christmas morning. The same recipe I had been making since 1987. I arrived at their house at 5 minutes past 2. The driveway was full of cars I did not recognize, which surprised me. But I assumed they had also invited Kristen's family. I carried the casserole in one hand and the bag of presents in the other, and I rang the doorbell. Kristen answered the door. She was dressed beautifully, her hair done, a glass of wine already in her hand. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was not the expression of someone greeting a guest. It was the expression of someone who had not expected an inconvenience. and was now calculating how to handle it. She said, "Margaret, what are you doing here?" I said I was there for Christmas dinner. I said Daniel had invited me. She stepped slightly forward, which was not an invitation in. She lowered her voice, and she said, "This is a family dinner. Just our family. I don't know why Daniel told you to come, but tonight isn't a good night." I stood there on the front porch in the cold, holding my green bean casserole, and I heard noise inside, children laughing, voices, the sound of a holiday that was happening without me. I could see Cooper through the gap in the door. He saw me too. He said, "Grandma Maggie," and started running toward the door. Kristen turned and said, in a voice that was meant to be light, but was not, "Cooper, go back inside." "Sweetie." He stopped. He looked at me and then at his mother, and he went back inside. I said, "Is Daniel here?" She said, "He's busy. I'll have him call you." Then she said, very clearly, "I'm sorry you drove all this way." She closed the door. I stood on that porch for a moment longer than I should have. Then I walked back to my car. I put the casserole on the passenger seat and the bag of presents in the back. I sat down. I looked at the house, all lit up with Christmas lights. My grandchildren inside. My son inside. I did not cry. I am not sure why. Maybe some pain is too clean for tears. I drove home. I put the casserole in my own refrigerator, and I ate a bowl of soup for Christmas dinner. And I watched an old movie. And I went to bed. Daniel texted me at 9:30 that night. He said, "Sorry about the mix-up. Mom, hope you had a nice day." A mix-up. 22 years of Christmas traditions. My grandchildren behind a closed door. My casserole made from scratch. And it was a mix-up. I did not respond that night. I lay in the dark, and I thought about my mother, who had worked 2 jobs and never once asked me to be grateful. I thought about Robert, who used to say that dignity was not something other people could give you or take away. You either held on to it or you didn't. I thought about the pearl earrings I had sold. I thought about 7 hours in a waiting room. I thought about Cooper's face in that gap in the door before his mother sent him away. I responded to Daniel the next morning with 4 words, "I hope so too." Then I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she is one of the sharpest people I know. I had drawn up my will 8 years earlier, after Robert died, and I had left everything, the house, my savings, my retirement accounts, everything, to Daniel. It had not occurred to me not to. He was my son. Patricia was in her office on the 26th, because she always worked the day after Christmas. She told me once that it was her most productive day of the year. I asked if she had time to talk. She said to come in at 11. I sat across from her and I told her everything. Not with anger, but calmly, the way I had been trained to give patient reports clearly, in order, with only the facts that mattered. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I told her I wanted to change my will entirely. I did not want to leave Daniel nothing. I was not doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I had finally understood something clearly. You do not leave a legacy to people who have decided you do not belong at the table. I told her I wanted to set up an education trust for Cooper and Avery, managed by Patricia's firm and completely outside of Daniel and Kristen's control. The trust would pay directly to their schools. No one could touch the principal. Whatever was left of my estate after that, I wanted divided between the Nursing Scholarship Fund at St. Paldert, Luke's Hospital, a fund that supported nursing students who couldn't afford to finish their degree, and an animal rescue organization in Columbus that I had quietly supported for years. Patricia wrote everything down. She said, "Are you sure?" I said I was sure. She said, "Give yourself 2 weeks before we make it official." I said I would. I drove home and spent those 2 weeks waiting for something to change my mind. Daniel called me 4 days after Christmas. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He said he was sorry about the mix-up again. I asked him directly. I said, "Daniel, did you know that Kristen was going to turn me away at the door?" There was a pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. He said, "Mom, it's complicated." I said, "It doesn't seem complicated to me." He said that Kristen had certain feelings about boundaries and family time, and that he was trying to respect her feelings. I said I understood. He said he hoped we could all move forward. I said I was sure we would find a way. I did not mention the will. 2 weeks passed. Nothing changed. I called Patricia and told her to finalize everything. She did. In February, Daniel called me and asked again about the renovation help. He said the contractor's price had gone up and it was now closer to $25,000. He said, "I know the timing hasn't been great, but you know I love you." Mom, I told him I loved him too. I told him I was no longer in a position to help with that kind of amount. He asked why. I said my financial situation had changed. He said, "Changed how?" I said, "I've made some adjustments to how I'm planning for the future." He did not push further that day. He pushed further in March. He came to my house, which surprised me, because he had not been to my house in 4 months. He sat at my kitchen table, where his father used to sit, and he asked me point blank if I had changed my will. I looked at my son, this man I had loved since before he took his first breath, and I said yes. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Because of Christmas." I said, "Not just because of Christmas." He said, "Kristen didn't mean it the way it came across." I said, "Danielle, all your wife closed the door in my face while I was holding a casserole I made for your son who specifically asked for it on Christmas Day, and you texted me that night and called it a mix-up." He didn't say anything. I said, "I have set up education trusts for Cooper and Avery. That money is protected for them, and no one can touch it. Whatever else I have, I've decided to use in ways that feel right to me. You are my son, and I love you. That will never change. But I am 69 years old, and I have worked my entire life. And I will not spend whatever years I have left apologizing for existing." Daniel left without a lot more words. He was not cruel. He looked sad, which was harder in some ways than anger would have been. Kristen called me 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was long. She said she had never intended to be hurtful. She said the holidays were stressful. She said she hoped we could start fresh. She did not once mention the $25,000, which I thought showed more self-awareness than I had previously given her credit for. I did not call her back that day. I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, and I watched the birds at the feeder I had put up the previous fall. And I thought about what starting fresh would actually mean, and whether it was something I wanted. Here is what I know now that I did not fully know before that Christmas Eve on the porch. I know that love is not the same thing as availability. I had made myself endlessly available with my time, my money, my presence. My casseroles and I had confused that availability with being loved in return. I was not unloved. I believe Daniel loves me. But love without respect is something incomplete. And I had been accepting the incomplete version for a long time, because the alternative was too painful to look at directly. I did eventually respond to Kristen. Not by phone, I wrote her a letter. Because I am from a generation that believes important things deserve to be written down. I told her that I did not hold permanent anger toward her. I told her that I wanted to be a grandmother to Cooper and Avery, and that I was willing to try again if she was willing to try honestly. I told her that I was not a woman who required perfection. I only required basic dignity. I sent the letter, and I waited. She called me the following Sunday. The conversation was not perfect. There were awkward silences and careful sentences. But she said she was sorry, a real sorry, not a qualified one, and I believed her. Or at least I believed that she meant it in that moment. Which was enough to start with. I am not going to tell you that everything is fixed. Because it is not. I see my grandchildren more than I did. But less than I would like. Daniel and I are rebuilding something. And it is slower and more careful than what we had before. The renovation help never came up again. And I never brought it up either. What I will tell you is this. I wake up every morning in my own house, which I own outright, where I have lived for 34 years. I go to the nursing scholarship luncheon at St. Eder, Luke's every spring, and I sit at a table with young women who are going to spend their careers caring for strangers the way I did. And I feel something I can only describe as rightness. I drive out to the rescue organization on the first Saturday of every month, and I walk the dogs for 2 hours. I have a neighbor, a widow named Frances, who comes for dinner on Friday nights, and we play cards until 10 o'clock. My life is full. Thanksgiving came last November. I was not invited to Daniel's house. I made my own dinner smaller, quieter. Just me and Frances's daughter who was in town visiting. We ate well and we talked about things that mattered, and no one asked me why I was there. I thought about what Robert used to say. About dignity being something you hold or let go. I held on to mine that Christmas Eve on the porch. I have been holding on to it ever since. And I promise you it is not as lonely as it sounds. Sometimes the quietest decision you ever make turns out to be the one that finally lets you breathe.